And that's how we end up with that solar eclipse. The moon comes between us and the sun. So if you've ever been in totality, where like the moon is completely eclipsing the sun, everything around you changes. You start seeing things in your periphery that you've never noticed before in the actual physical space. And that's very similar to what happens in an eclipse portal that starts with a solar eclipse.
Welcome to the Feminine Alchemy Podcast, where we explore the truth about the feminine, the peaceful, the wild, and the visceral. I'm your host, Jaye Behringer, joined by my co-hosts, Julie Dean Richards and Kayelee Rose. Each week, we explore the deep mysteries of the feminine and help listeners apply them to their daily lives in a practical way. Join us to unlock the hidden wisdoms your soul has been waiting for.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Feminine Alchemy. I'm Jaye, and Kayelee is here with me. We are doing our Eclipse Portal episode. Kayelee, say hi.
Hello.
So about every 6 months, we have what's called an Eclipse Portal, and we usually do a show. Sometimes we'll do two because it's pretty big. But we're going to talk about what the Eclipse Portal means, what are some of the themes that are coming up around this Eclipse Portal, and what we can kind of expect, the energies. Anyways, you can never predict realities, right? We always want to, but we can't do that. All right. So Kayelee, tell us about eclipses in general. What does that mean for us? What are our opportunities in an eclipse portal, regardless of the other factors?
Okay, so eclipse portals are this sometimes pretty intense, potentially kind of magical feeling period of time where we have about 18 months worth of growing and learning and opportunities for soul level development squished into about 2 weeks. I mean, occasionally eclipse portals are actually longer than 2 weeks when they're a series of 3 eclipses instead of a series of 2. But this particular portal is just an opening and a closing. There's no central eclipse. And it's, I don't know, I'm thinking back to the most recent eclipse portal before this one, and it was an absolute doozy for me. Like, completely life altering. And so there is that. Like, eclipse portals can be life altering, and they can also be just this period of time where you're like, I know something is happening, but I'm not really sure exactly what it is. And it feels maybe a little uncomfortable or kind of odd. But depending on how an eclipse portal is set up and how your personal birth chart is and your personal energy is, it can feel like you're having the most intense growth spurt ever. And it can feel like, I don't really know what just happened. Did something just happen? Meh. So don't get scared, is what I'm saying. Don't get scared of an eclipse portal. I'm reminding myself of this too, that they're always, always, always an opportunity. They're a gift. Just sometimes it doesn't feel like it in the moment. And sometimes they go a lot more smoothly than you would think. So no stress. We're just right in the way of the eclipse portal.
I always think of it as like if you've ever played Mario Kart and you hit those little speed arrows. That's to me what the eclipse portal is about. But it's like everybody hits the speed arrow and it's all in different directions. And whatever it is that is your life journey, your life path, is those are the themes that are going to come up. But there are some kind of global things that we can sort of measure, themes that will come up for us, themes that everyone will start to experience on a larger scale, and then how these individual factors play into your chart and how that's connected. It's going to start to determine some of those energies for you. Because for some people, it's like, it reminds me of this time I was had this really big storm and everyone had lost power. It was kind of chaotic and people were going to the grocery store, but I lived really close to a power transformer, so I never lost power. I had cash on hand just because that was normal for me. So that, quote, disaster, it didn't affect me the same way that it affected other people. And likewise, there have been lots of times where people their lives are like super normal, super great. And I'm like having an experience, right? So global experiences do not necessarily define personal experiences. And if you want a little bit of a leg up on how things are going to play out for you in the energetic space, then you want to look at how your chart interacts with this. So we're going to talk about some specific points when you're looking at these points and you go, oh, I don't have anything in that space. That's probably a good thing. Also look for anything that's kind of squaring that or opposing it. And that's going to give you some sense of, is this part of it going to affect me?
Yeah, exactly. Because the moon is so prominent in an eclipse portal, you also can look at, okay, where does the moon traverse in this chart? It'll cover half of the chart basically in that 2-week period. And that can give you a good sense of like, okay, this half of my chart will at least be activated by the emotional center, by the intuitive center, by that beautiful moon. Shall we talk a little bit about this particular solar eclipse, for example? It's starting as this eclipse portal starts with a solar eclipse at the North Node. What does that mean? Well, what it means is that this eclipse portal is starting with a new moon. So the sun and the moon are besties. They're just right there together. And that's how we end up with that solar eclipse. The moon comes between us and the sun. So if you've ever been in totality, where like the moon is completely eclipsing the sun, everything around you changes. You start seeing things in your periphery that you've never noticed before in the actual physical space. And that's very similar to what happens in an eclipse portal that starts with a solar eclipse. There's this sense of like, I'm seeing things I've never seen before. I'm having a perspective that I've never had before. And sometimes that can be a little bit more internally, like that's your internal world. You're seeing things within yourself. It can also be a little bit more like, hey, the world around me doesn't look the same as it did before I entered this eclipse portal. And where it's happening near the North Node, eclipse portals that open at the North Node or near the North Node, they very much have the sense of like, okay, can you remove the things that are blocking you from receiving divine or universal love? Can you get out of your own way, basically? Whereas when eclipse portals start at the South Node, there's more this sense of, am I going to do my inner work? Am I going to do the stuff so that I can progress on a soul level? This is more like, okay, will I receive? Do I believe I'm worthy of receiving? Will I allow myself to receive? And then as we move through the eclipse portal, we'll hit kind of this midpoint of the eclipse portal, which will actually be in Taurus. This eclipse portal is really interesting because normally you have axis pairs. So it would be like one eclipse happens in Pisces and the other eclipse happens in Virgo. But this one is actually crossing over. So the first eclipse happens in the late degrees of Aquarius, and the second eclipse happens in the earlier degrees of Virgo. So it's kind of like we're having some growth around the nodal axis of Virgo to Pisces that we've been living in, but we're also getting a taste of like, hey, guess what? We're going to have a nodal shift and it's going to shift us into Leo to Aquarius, and we're going to get a taste of that. So this portal is a very interesting mix of the beyond all of us, transpersonal, but also humanity, and then also very, very detailed and very like, how do I show up and how do I shine? It's all of this mixed together. And having that midpoint in Taurus, it's like this eclipse portal is saying, okay, in the middle of all of this, in the middle of all of this growth, are you going to lean into love and joy and pleasure? And the midpoint of this eclipse actually occurs near the ruler of Aquarius, Uranus. Uranus is near the midpoint of this eclipse portal, Uranus in Taurus. And so there's this huge capacity for receiving insane, in a good way, downloads about your self-worth and what you have to bring to the world. Is there anything you want to add to that, Jaye?
Yeah, that's all good stuff. I want to remind people that we said Uranus went into Gemini last year. It's dancing between Gemini and Taurus until later this year and permanently goes into Gemini. And we talked about that before. So I just wanted to remind people of that. But really going into this eclipse portal, emotions are already high in the world, especially in the US, but definitely in the world. So I would not be surprised if people become even more emotional. Let us allow that emotion to come with some growth and clarity and intention as we work forwards through this. So let's start with the opening eclipse portal. The sun and the moon are conjunct in the first one, right? So that's what a solar eclipse is. Well, that's required for a solar eclipse. And there's more than one conjunction here. So we've got the North Node conjunct Venus. We have Saturn exactly conjunct Neptune right next to each other. This one is super not normal. A lot of people have been talking about this particular conjunction for a little while because it is at 0 degrees of Aries. So that one we'll talk about too. And then we have Vesta conjunct Mars, very, very tightly conjunct Mars. And if we're being generous, Pallas Athena is there with Venus in the North Node as well. So, and guess what? Guess what? We care about all the asteroid goddesses. So these are really important.
And there's also Ceres conjunct Chiron.
Yes.
I mean, it's a little bit looser conjunction. It's about 2-3 degrees. But there's a lot of really interesting interactions here where, for me, where so much of my work does focus on the asteroid goddesses, there's a part of me that's just super excited because there's this sense of like, oh, this eclipse portal has potential to help rebalance and integrate the masculine and the feminine together. Mm-hmm. And I love that. The world really needs that right now. The world is fracturing in so many different ways, especially where Venus is conjunct the North Node and Pallas is right there too. Conjunct the North Node in Pisces. The North Node is like, hey, this is where we're heading. This is where the energy that we're collectively learning to steward in its highest form. So let's choose into its highest form. And the message that comes across to me in looking at that chart is, hey, this eclipse portal is about, are you going to get out of your own way to be able to receive divine feminine love, whatever that may look like to you? Are you going to let the goddess in, if you want to refer to it that way? Are you going to allow your own feminine energy to be held and loved? Are you going to be open to spiritual and intuitive insights around how you can creatively but very effectively utilize your feminine energy in the world? That's what this eclipse portal, in some ways, that just seems to be the main theme to me, where there's so much connected there to that North Node that's in the feminine realm.
Absolutely. One thing interesting I want to highlight is that there's Pluto at 4 degrees Aquarius all the way to Neptune at 0 degrees Aries. Every single personal planet is in there. There is Venus and 2 of the asteroid goddesses, the sun and the moon, and the part of fortune. So this is a lot of stuff going on just in Aquarius and Pisces.
Yeah. And the beginning of Aries with that.
Yes.
pattern.
Yes. So when I'm saying like, oh, there's a couple of conjunctions here, like everybody sent their biggest and baddest to the to the space during this eclipse.
Just about. I mean, Jupiter's not in the mix, but like just about everybody.
Yeah. So, again, that's why I was like, this one's really intense. And that North Node that you were talking about, Kayelee, that is to me like the point, right? Mm-hmm. The North Node is conjunct Venus, which is like, this is the point. Here's the point. It is bringing in the feminine. And we're seeing that in real time. That sacred feminine rage is really rising to the surface, right? And I think that also speaks volumes to the Mars and Vesta conjunction, because Vesta is very much about sacred, and we talk about sacred fire. And then we have Mars, which is just pure rage sometimes.
And Mars can also be about self-advocacy. Like, where am I going to really stand up for myself and recognize that I matter and my needs matter? And it's not as an afterthought. They are a big deal. So Mars, that advocate that can be pretty intense and not always think things through, is hanging out with Vesta, who's like, how do I keep the light of life alive? How do I keep the light of hope alive? What is most sacred to me? And she can be pretty fiery too.
Yeah. And that's an Aquarius, which means it's going to be in really surprising, new, innovative ways.
And show up very much in the collective consciousness, in the sense of like, how can this benefit all of humanity? Like, yeah, I matter a lot. And how does this matter to humanity?
Absolutely. Then the sun and the moon conjunct, which we always talk about with eclipses, but remind us, what does that mean?
So it's like the inner self and the outer self, your feminine energy and your masculine energy, like they come together as one. It can be a very creative energy, but it also can lead to some blind spots, because the main components that make up an individual, like the most basic components, are looking from the same place. So during this eclipse, it would be very wise, for many reasons, to think before you speak or act rashly. because you may not have the full perspective. Yes, you're probably seeing things in a different way and seeing things that you've never seen before, but you're not seeing everything. You can't see everything in an eclipse portal. You can't see everything all at once. It's layers and there's nuance. So in some ways, I'm not asking you to like take no action. I am asking you to sit with things a little bit and allow them to unfold, even though there's going to be some fiery energy that's like, let's do something right now. That energy is important and it can be harnessed for change and for good things, but it's more likely to burn out and be gone and not do what you want it to do if you fall too much into the emotion without allowing the emotion to process before you decide what it means. Because deciding what it means in the moment, there's a good chance you're not going to get the meaning that actually is truly there. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love this. And I kind of think about it as my thoughts create emotions and my emotions create thoughts, and they just end up in this vicious cycle. And it's hard to separate out the difference between a thought and emotion when you have the moon and the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't figure that out, if you can't see the difference between your thoughts and your emotions, you're not going to be thinking clearly, but you're going to feel all this drive to take action. So again, just take a beat, feel your body, be in your body. This whole eclipse portal, the answer, I think, is really to just be in your body as much as possible instead of trying to escape or trying to fix or be the savior, because no one can do that. And be in your body, and you're going to take the next right steps, really, is what I think is probably the best way to do that.
Yeah. And if it feels too much to be in your body, because let's be real, sometimes that's a thing. Sometimes it feels like way too much to be present in your own body. Engaging in something that feels creative or that makes you feel connected kind of to the universe, whether that's stargazing or fire gazing, just something that helps remind you that there's something bigger than you, something bigger than the country that you live in and the problems it may be experiencing, something bigger than this planet that we live on and the problems that we're experiencing on this planet. The existence is so much bigger. So if you can't be in body, be in universe, I guess, and not from a space of like, I'm going to dissociate and pretend everything's fine, but from a space of, oh, wait a minute, let's put some perspective on this. Let's look from this telescopic big picture view if I can't handle being right here, right now in this body of mine.
Yes, that's a good way to put it too, because it's a tricky space, and I think it's tricky even enough to ask the big questions of, is there anything out there, for some people.
Yeah.
And it can be very hard right now. It can be overwhelming, like you said, to be in your body. One of the things I want to say is the good news is that the part of fortune is in all of this, which is kind of lucky. So remembering that none of this is for nothing. It's not all for nothing, even though sometimes it might feel like it's all for nothing. That part of fortune is like, the treasure is here. It's very, very close to the sun and the moon, actually. I know, not by part of fortune standards. It's not that close, but it's emotionally very close. And giving yourself that pause to say, oh, there really is something that's happening and it is moving forward. When it starts to feel overwhelming, give yourself a little bit of hope. And if hope feels painful, give yourself a little bit of relief.
Yeah. One thing that I looked back at the chart again. One thing that's standing out now is in this eclipse chart, we've got the South Node in Virgo and we've got the North Node in Pisces. And just given my own personal experiences over the past 6 months with health related things, there keeps coming to mind the sense of like, okay, you may be focusing on some sort of healing or some sort of shift in the details of your life. Kayelee, or person listening to this podcast episode, you may be focusing on that right now. And that may be feeling really heavy and really desperate even. But can you open up and trust that there are things working behind the scenes that you don't understand maybe at this point? That Piscean and Venusian energy hanging out with the North Node, there is something afoot. There is something at play, and you don't have to keep spinning your wheels trying to make something happen in the details of your life. You can rest for a little while. Just rest for a little while and allow. And maybe things won't look the way that you want them to at the end of the eclipse portal, But I do absolutely believe that there is some incredible healing available in this eclipse portal. And it may be in a sense that is unexpected, especially with that midpoint being by the king of unexpected things, Uranus.
I love this. Those are all good things. And then also Mercury's in that mix too. So this is, again, like I said, all of the personal planets are involved. This is going to feel so personal. Everything is going to feel so personal. And again, don't get lost with your thoughts and feelings. Don't get stuck in this idea of everything is the worst and it's too overwhelming. And really, really hone in on feeling the feminine come through your body in whatever form she takes. Remember, the feminine is not this sit quietly, sit in the corner, be pretty existence. The feminine has extreme amounts of power. The feminine has extreme amounts of transformative change, right? What have I talked about with feminine positive feedback loops, right? Birth is a feminine positive feedback loop. Birth always looks like a disaster until it's over. That is the point. Feminine positive feedback loops create crazy change. And in the midst of it, it always feels like the more you do, the worse it's getting. Because that is the point. We're not in an equilibrium homeostasis. It is a positive feedback loop, which that's how change comes about.
Mhm.
But until that point, it feels very, very scary. And that is normal. And that is terrifying and normal.
And can be incredibly intense, but also something that Julie shared from her most recent birth is just this idea that when you resist that feedback loop, that positive feedback loop, when you try to slow it down or make it look different than it does, it hurts a whole heck of a lot more than if you relax into it and trust that you really are held, that there really is an intelligence to the process if you will surrender to it.
Exactly. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yep. Yes. Yeah. One last thing I will say about that actually is we've been in a space of airy-fairy spirituality lifestyle. That's what Neptune and Pisces is. Everything goes, anything's fine, lots of spiritual bypass, and just Saturn really goes, okay, but let's ground that. Let's see what it is that is real. And I think that is coming to light and coming to reality for a lot of people. Sort of like if somebody just turned the gravity on and you've just been floating around, and somebody just turned the gravity on, it's like, whoa, hold on. That hurts. So that's really all I want to say about that. Okay, let's move on to the second eclipse. So the first one's on the 17th of February. The midpoint will be when?
I actually didn't calculate when the midpoint would be. Forgot about doing that. But it's basically in the middle, about a week from the beginning and about a week from the end.
So probably on a Tuesday, it'll be the midpoint. And that's when it's really going to bring in that Taurus and Uranus energy that Kayelee was talking about. And then the closing lunar eclipse happens on March 3rd. And let's talk about that.
Yeah. So like the lunar eclipse will be happening near the south node. And that's part of what brings in this sense of like, okay, coming from the top of things into the bottom of things and bringing like, will you let things come in? Will you receive? With a lunar eclipse, it's actually the earth that casts a shadow on the moon. The earth comes between the sun and the moon. The masculine and the feminine are opposing each other, not in that they're adversaries, but in that they're looking from different perspectives on the same axis. And then the earth, which actually represents us as a whole, like as a whole person, is in the middle there, casting a shadow that makes the moon kind of look like blood or like shadows. Sometimes it looks red, sometimes it looks brown, sometimes it looks gray. And what that is kind of symbolic of, but actually happens in a very literal way, is this sense of inner wounds coming to light so that they can be healed. Where are your shadows? Where are you bleeding internally? And now it's coming to the surface so that you know it's there. And so the second half of the eclipse portal, as it gets closer to that lunar eclipse, there is a little bit more the sense of like, oh, wow, not only do I have a new perspective from that solar eclipse, but now I'm starting to see wounds that I didn't know were there. Wounds that have been driving my reality because I was unconscious of them. And as I become conscious of them, I have some choices. Like I can push them back down. I can freak out. I can have compassion for myself and maybe understand myself a little bit better. I can seek to integrate the parts of me that I cut off. I can cut them off further. Like you have lots of options. I can tell you what probably the options that will lead towards the greatest soul growth are, which are self-compassion and integration of your shadows. But it's really up to you. It feels a little weird to say this, but there isn't a wrong way to go through an eclipse portal. There's just the way that you go through it. And it will be more difficult or less difficult depending on how you decide to view it and the choices that you make because of how you view it. It's not right or wrong. It just is. It exists, and you'll learn one way or another. You will learn. You get to choose how you learn.
Yes, I love it. The sun and the moon are opposing. I always like to think about positions as like two people can be standing across from each other and they could be in an argument or they could just be in conversation. It is all about how you view that tension, that intensity, and that position. Okay, so what are some key factors that are going on here? We have the sun conjunct Pallas,
which is pretty cool.
And again, we're having these feminine roles come up. And it's not the feminine roles, again, of like, sit nice and look pretty. Pallas is the strategic warrior.
Yeah.
Hello. Sit nice and look pretty is not Pallas's jam. She's be intelligent and take action in a strategic way. And we have even 2 weeks is enough. Like, I want to highlight this Saturn and Neptune conjunction thing. In 2 weeks, Saturn's already moved 2 degrees. Okay. Think about that. That 0 degrees during an eclipse, that's crazy. That conjunction during an eclipse, like the rarer something is, the more potent the energy is, especially when we're talking about these big players like Saturn and Neptune. What are some things that are jumping out for you, Kayelee?
I'm coming back to this Chiron and Ceres hanging out together. And what it makes me think of is grief cycles, because Chiron can be associated with our pain, our deepest wounds, but also our mastery, in some ways calling to own our wounds in such a way that they don't define us, but instead mentor us into our next iteration, whatever that may be. And Ceres is like, okay, what season are we in? What season are we in that process? And it's a very personal thing because it's in Aries. So like on one end of Aries, we've got Chiron and Ceres. And on the other end of Aries, we have Neptune and Saturn. And so there's this sense of like, okay, we've got fantasy and dissociation, but we've also got incredible creativity and compassion. And we've got blocks and limits and things we just can't do, but we've also got the foundations of reality and how do we manifest things into reality, and then pain and I don't matter and I don't belong, as well as I am an incredible human being. And wounds are part of the process of learning and growing. And then Ceres tying it up at the end, after all those other players, tying it up and saying, there's a time and a season for all things. There is a cycle. So if during this eclipse portal you feel yourself deep in the dark, in the depths of something that you just really don't want to be in, this is a reminder that this too shall pass. And maybe the thing that you're grappling with is actually something that you'll live with your entire life, but the intensity, the pain, the believing that whatever you're going through means something about you, it's a season. It doesn't have to last forever. It's not going to last forever. Unless you use your agency to try to prolong it, you can do that. That is an option. You can use your thoughts and your powerful imagination and your actions to make whatever you're experiencing last longer. You can do that. You can decide if that's what you want to do. But this is a season in a cycle, and you're not the same person as you were the last time you came through this cycle. So if something was hard before, it may not be quite the same now.
So good. Okay. I love this. You may not be the same person that you were going into this, because the energies, as intense as they still are at the end of it, are much less intense from when they were in the beginning. Other than Chiron and Ceres, they were the ones who actually get closer. Okay, so what are some things that people might do during an eclipse portal that will help them? I know we talked about not fighting it and giving yourself that permission, but like, what are some tangible things that people can do during the portal when things get really, really intense? I mean, they're the same resources and the same things as any time in your life when things get intense. But what can we remind people to do when they're feeling this much intensity?
Remember to breathe, for one thing. Remember to breathe. And that sounds silly, but when we're in stress, a lot of us stop breathing. We will hold our breaths, and remembering to breathe, take deep breaths, slower breaths. It can help your nervous system settle down so that it is not so intense for you. And something that just keeps popping into my head for this particular eclipse portal is forgiveness work. And I don't mean that as like, oh, just brush aside whatever thing that you feel like you need to forgive and just get over it. Like, no. Forgiveness, even if you're forgiving somebody else, is really for you. It's about your heart feeling more whole. And so what forgiveness work could look like in this eclipse portal is potentially a journaling process. Having a journaling practice where if it feels right to write down the things that are hurting and then just express love to yourself, forgiveness to yourself, or write down the things that feel good and then express love to yourself. If anyone who's listening, if you're familiar with a Hawaiian practice called, I might be pronouncing it incorrectly, but Ho'oponopono.
Yeah, that's right. Ho'oponopono.
Yeah, that is incredibly powerful. And I'm trying to remember the exact phrases. I think it's
I'm so sorry. Please forgive me.
yes,
I love you. Thank you.
yes, there it is.
And I find it very interesting. I saw a case study, but it was a case study of an entire mental institution where somebody was just looking at each individual file of the people in this institution and saying that those four things and every reaction that person would have to this person's file. They would just say these things. And it turns out they ended up closing that institution because everyone just got better.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting and powerful how much can affect the world by forgiving. And again, it is not a bypass thing. It is not a letting
No.
other people off the hook thing. If anyone says, like, let them go so that they can be, like, it has nothing to do with them, you can wish eternal damnation on somebody and forgive them at the same time. Resentment is a poison that we take and hope that someone else feels worse. And that's not how it works. When we forgive, it has nothing to do with letting another person off the hook. It has to do with giving ourselves that relief and that soothing and that peace and not holding it hostage to someone else's actions. Because what happens is a lot of times what we're wanting when we resent or when we're angry and we want to stay angry, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with anger. But what can happen is we're holding our own peace hostage until that person is served justice in some way or form. And that may or may not happen, right?
Yeah.
It's a little bit different than I want to feel safe and I want that person behind bars because that person is not a safe person. But when we are saying, I'm not going to feel good, I'm not going to give myself permission to feel safe or happy or peaceful or any kind of anything until that person is served justice, we are holding our own peace hostage to someone else's actions. And that's not good for you.
Yeah, 100%.
That's what we're talking about here is give yourself permission to feel okay. Not that that happened was okay, not that that person is okay, but it's okay to feel okay. That is the most important thing in forgiveness work. And it is, again, not about getting over it. It's not, don't ever interact with that person again. Fine. Don't ever go to that place again. Fine. But give yourself permission to have that little bit of peace. Even if it just one little bit every day, just, okay, I can forgive, and rewriting that word forgive to having that peace. And I think that's a big piece of why the Ho'oponopono can be triggering sometimes for people, because it's like, well, I didn't do anything. Why do I have to say I'm sorry? I didn't do anything. Why do I have to forgive? And it's really just about the energetics of I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to myself that happened to me.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to the person that I'm seeing, whatever. I think there's a lot of trauma dumping on the internet. I think a lot of people right now are having an experience. So we're exposed to a lot of stuff right now, and having that compassion, being a compassionate person and being exposed to that can be really hard. So if you start with, I'm so sorry that happened to that person. I don't even know that person. And I feel for them, and being present with that, you can do a lot of good. Not saying it's the only action to take. Don't sit in your living room, expect the world to change. It's fine. I get that. Just start with, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I love you. Thank you for sharing your story with me. Wish that never happened to you. All these things can be built into the Ho'opono Ho'oponopono prayer without feeling like I'm going to take on the pain. Do not do that.
Yeah, you're not taking on the pain. No, not at all. And something about the phrasing, like just those 4 phrases, one thing that it's really doing is acknowledging that no one's an island. Nothing happens in isolation. What happens to one of us happens to all of us on an energetic level. We're all connected. We're all part of the same universe. The electrons that exist in somebody else, or even somebody who lived forever ago, they can be and are part of us. The same materials that made up the beginning of the world make us up now, or make up some part of the universe. Like, it's all in us and around us. And so these phrases acknowledge that the parts in me that are connected to what has happened here are sorry for what has happened here. Not that I personally am responsible, but that I am connected to all things and all things are connected to me. And I don't say that to freak anybody out, because I understand that concept can be a little like, I don't want to be connected to all things, but it doesn't make you personally responsible. It does mean that as you shift your own energy into a space of forgiveness that is peace, that is wholeness, not forgiveness, like just like Jan was saying earlier, that as we shift the things around us just by existing. And I think that's what Ho'oponopono is about.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's a wild ride.
Yes. Being human is a wild ride.
Being human is a wild ride, dude. Being conscious and being human is a really wild ride, because you see a lot more and you go, oh man. Oh man. So, what are some good resources for people? What are some books you've read that have helped you with some of this? Or I don't know. I just want to give people some things they can do.
The book that immediately popped into my head that I wasn't necessarily expecting was The Anatomy of Peace. I think it's by the Harbinger Institute. It's a super, super powerful book that relates to a lot of concepts that we talked about today, this episode, as far as matters of forgiveness and matters of being connected to other people. And also it gives really powerful perspective for acknowledging the humanity in other people while acknowledging our own humanity. It's a life-changing book, honestly. Like, it's one of the handful of books I've read that I'm like, wow, I am a different person because I have read this. Another one that I didn't expect to pop into my head it's called The Power of TED, The Power of TED, which stands for the empowerment dynamic. If you've ever heard of, I think it's the Karpman drama triangle. It's just this idea of like, okay, we can approach life from a victim space, and then everything around us is either a persecutor or a martyr, or I can't remember what they all are. But that can be flipped on its head, and you can be a creator instead of a victim. And then everything else shifts around you accordingly. And I feel like in this eclipse, like, we can approach this eclipse portal from a space of everything's happening to me and I'm a victim. And I get that. I've been in that space quite a bit off and on the past couple of months, where it's like, why did this happen to me? This really sucks. Everything is awful. It's a natural part of going through something difficult to, at least for a time, kind of identify as a victim of the experience. But as we shift into the space of creator, I'm a creator of my life. I am a co-creator of my life with the universe, with the divine, with whatever higher power you may acknowledge. It starts to set you free in ways that are hard to imagine when you're in that space of I am a victim to my experiences. And I don't say any of this to shame anyone. Like, I've absolutely been there. Like, as recently as last night, I was there in that space of like, everything sucks and I hate everything. But sometimes we can't change our circumstances. We can't change what we've gone through, but we can decide what it means. And sometimes we can't even decide how we respond to it if our nervous systems are super offline. So I'm not even going to say that. I'm not even going to say you can choose how you respond. You can choose what it means to you. You can decide what it means, and what you decide will create your reality moving forward.
I love this. Also, drink your water, guys.
Yes.
Drink your water. I don't know, man. I've been doing some herbal supplements and some vitamins when I haven't in a long time, and that's been a game changer for me. Making sure that you're well nourished is important. Because when we're rewriting neural pathways like this, you do a lot of sleeping and need a lot of water. You got to do a lot of making sure that your body has the building blocks to rewrite those neural pathways in a really strong way. So make sure that you're listening to your body and what the nourishment need is. Yeah, I've been going through a moment of deconstruction from religion in the last, I would say, 3 or 4 months. And I don't talk about that here very much. But what I do want to say is a really good book for just dipping your toe in the feminine and how that relates to whatever religious experience you're having is The Dance of the Dissident Daughter by Sue Kidd. And if all of the stuff that we've talked about with the witch trials and, the witch wound and all of that is like, okay, that's too much. I can't even use the W word. Sue Kidd is a Christian writer who started to write about the feminine in a transformative way. And she was terrified to publish this book because she was always published by Christian publishing houses. She was like, here's some holes in femininity and Christianity, and these are my feelings. And she was really, really afraid to even write and publish this book. So I read it, I guess, 10 years ago, and that was such a transformative book for me. And it changed so much for me. And I was like, oh my gosh, witch trials are real. So those are my thoughts on this, because I think that is a huge theme of a lot of these things, whether it's in the stars or not. I think a lot of people are working with that energetic of how does Christianity play a factor in all of this. So yeah, anyways, just drink your water, stay nourished, do some journaling, and take a nap if it's too much. It's okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, everybody. Thank you, Kayelee, for all your wisdom. I always love it.
Well, thank you. I always love exploring things with you on this podcast.
So fun. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening and have a great week and take care of yourself.
And that's how we end up with that solar eclipse. The moon comes between us and the sun. So if you've ever been in totality, where like the moon is completely eclipsing the sun, everything around you changes. You start seeing things in your periphery that you've never noticed before in the actual physical space. And that's very similar to what happens in an eclipse portal that starts with a solar eclipse.